Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Slings, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 3 of the Debriefing. In this series, we take a close look at single engagements in EVE Online. In this episode, we have a sequence involving a Venture, a Hecate, and a Loki. Let's begin. First, let's have a look at the fits involved in our 3 ships. My Venture is the only fit that I know for certain, but the Loki and Hecate are both pulled from losses that these 2 pilots had recently. As I've talked about in other videos, my Venture is a simple armor buffer blaster affair. Target selection is everything for me, but the price tag means that I can just engage everything and see what happens. The Hecate gets excellent tracking and good speed. With a dual web setup, my Venture poses 0 threat to him. Likewise, the Loki has more good range control, plus an active setup along with EC300s, as we'll see in the clip. The Loki should not really be concerned with me either. This episode is a little different. There are no kills in this engagement, but this is due to all 3 of us making some poor decisions. From all this, we'll be extracting 4 lessons, in addition to the general amusement that comes with this sequence. You'll see what I mean. Lesson 1. Baiting is good, but there is such thing as too much. Lesson 2. Third parties. In a multi-pilot scenario, you are not the only thing your opponents are paying attention to. They're also paying attention to each other. 3. Win conditions. Learn to know when you have gained the upper hand in a fight. Don't throw it away because you might not get it back. And 4. Kill boards. If you have time, do some killboard research to find out what your opponent is likely flying and how it's fit. When I enter the system initially, I see the Hecate camping a bubble off the gate that I just came in on. My plan was to warp off and warp back, getting caught in the bubble with him and see what happened. However, when I return, he's moved off to a pounce. I find this odd because, as we've talked about, I present such an easy target to this Hecate, so I make a series of moves designed to give him the opportunity to engage on his terms. I warp off and back between the 2 bubbles he has set up between these gates. I let my ship auto-approach the gate from 100 kilometers off while he watches. Also during this part, the cloaky Loki makes an appearance, and I start to get the feeling that they're not working together, checking Z-kill to confirm my suspicion. At some point though, I go from acting dumb to looking like bait. By the time this clip starts, I'm fairly certain that the Loki and the Hecate have no illusions that I'm a helpless newbie, which brings us to lesson number 1. Baiting is good, but too much can cost you. Nevertheless, they still want blood, so I decide enough is enough and warp myself to a bubble and just sit there. One of them is bound to decide to do something eventually, and I decide to have the patience to let that happen. The Hecate starts to burn at me from the gate instead of warping to his bubble for some reason, but good enough. I'm almost positive that I'll lose, but this is the fight I'm looking for. Just before 50 kilometers out, he veers off. At this point, I remember saying to myself out loud, "The hell is happening?" What I didn't think of at the time, but we'll talk about now, was that the Loki and Hecate were afraid of each other, which is lesson number 2. In this multi-pilot scenario, you are not the only factor the other pilots are considering. I don't know if breaking off was the right move for the Hecate, but he turned out to be a little clairvoyant. The Loki decloaks 12 kilometers off me just seconds later, and I take the opportunity that his cloak timer affords me to get in close, scram, tracking disrupt, and start applying damage. I have no illusions about actually killing the Loki, but like I mentioned, an extremely cheap ship gives me the luxury to engage everything and see what happens. Thankfully, I get in fast enough, and he has no chance of hitting me unless he starts making some decisions, which is where we get into lesson number 3. The Loki has solid and clear-cut win conditions that he needs to start working towards very quickly. The reason he needs to start working towards them quickly is because, remember, the Hecate is sitting down there. Lesson number 2. So the Loki's first move is to point and web me. The point is only useful psychologically. Remember, I have +2 warp core strength in the venture. If you've never experienced this before, even when you're warp core stabilized, like my venture is, seeing the point or scryme icon has a strong mental effect. Pilots will often not even contemplate trying to warp, even if they can, because they see that icon. The web is the first good step in actually killing me. But having me webbed alone will not allow his guns to track, especially considering he's artillery fit, not autocannon. Next he starts to burn away, which is exactly right. Orbiting me, keeping at range, neither of these ship commands will do him any good. Even when webbed, my venture is faster than his Loki, so he must manually pilot his ship in one direction, or align to something, and keep flying that way. This will cause my orbit to become elongated. In order to maintain transversal and keep him in scran range, I would have to quickly get a good corkscrew maneuver along his vector. Disclaimer, I don't even know if this is possible to maintain with a 1-second server tick, but I'm not going to get the time to set that up anyways, as we'll see. Finally, he starts to panic, which brings us back to Lesson 2 again. He is most likely expecting the Hecate to warp up at any moment and engage him with a lot of speed, a scram to hold him down, and a ton of damage. So he puts out his EC300s to break my scram. Again, this is the right move, as he needs to get his weapon tracking under control and pull range to get a good shot off. As you see here, once my lock breaks and he can track, even at almost point blank, he takes 20% of my buffer with one shot. At this point, probably still out of fear for the Hecate, he makes the mistake that costs him the kill. Go ahead and pause the video here. What would you do if you were in Loki's position? It isn't a trick, it's super simple, and assume I'm not going to try and warp. He should have preheated his micro warp drive, activated it as soon as my scram dropped, and simply applied damage as he burns safely out of my scram range and away from where the Hecate might be able to warp to. At this point, he has complete range control. He has achieved his win condition and should have absolutely no fear of me or the Hecate, especially considering his web. Instead, he warps. I go ahead and kill the remaining EC300s, not really expecting the Hecate to come after me, since he's been almost completely passive for this entire sequence. However, he does warp up, and I prepare for round 2, but he merely scoops his bubble and warps as well. Remember lesson 4? If you have time, check Z-Kill board. He had all this time to see my fit on Z-Kill and had every reason to think that I would have been an easy target, if not very challenging. Instead, I think he based his decision on the fact that the Loki disengaged, meaning that he vastly overestimated me. So let's recap. How did a single venture manage to spook not 1, but 2 Tech 3 PvP fit ships? First, I made myself look too eager. I might have even looked like bait for a gang of some kind to these 2 pilots. Second, it wasn't just me in the venture. Both the Hecate and the Loki were worried about each other, in addition to my strange venture warping around. Third, the Loki panicked, didn't realize he had gained range control, and gave up right when he had secured his win condition. Fourth, the Hecate didn't take advantage of the ample time that he had to research me and decide to go for it. That concludes this episode of the Debriefing. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please leave a comment if you think I missed something important. Let me know what you think of this format, and if you have any footage of yourself or someone else you would like to see analyzed, feel free to leave a comment, find me on Twitter, the EVE Discord, God help us, or simply contact me in-game. This has been Slings, and thank you for watching.